Okay. So we're gonna start. Okay, so we will continue with the next sessions, which is between stakeholder perspectives. So with the title, Psychiatric Exclusion Criteria in Clinical Research, Bridging the Ethical and Health Need Divide, we have Josephine Tapper from EUPATI Fellow and Patient Representative.
Good morning y gracias a ECRIN y todo por la invitación, que es un gran placer, y obviamente estar en Madrid. Vamos, my name is Josephine Tapper. I am a patient, but I'm much more besides. So I'm going to discuss with you the exclusion of mental health in clinical research and how it's persistent. And although there are improvements, there doesn't seem to be enough change. If you excuse the font, I've had real IT problems. Alex from ECRIN has been super tolerant. So, yeah, hopefully you can read it. But if you have any questions, we have the panel afterwards. And some of what I'm going to discuss has been covered earlier. You know, I'd really like to thank the two previous sessions. So I have lived experience of physical and psychiatric ill health. I have a serious mental health disorder. I am a EUPATI fellow, so it's great to be here with them. In terms of what's relevant to what I'm going to talk about, I'm a lay advisor to the UK's Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency, particularly as regards communication engagement, but also AI and software, because I work with industry to sort of develop equitable software and apps. Also sit on various trial design and ethics committees, and I'm a lay funding panel assessor for the National Institute of Health and Social Care Research, and I really do interrogate anybody that's coming to funding as to how inclusive their approach is. So we've already discussed why exclusion matters this morning, but I'm just going to draw on a couple of points, not all of them. Those of us with serious mental health disorders, our life expectancy can be up to 20 years less than the normal population, those without serious mental health disorder. And a lot of that is caused by preventative ill health, but particularly cardiovascular and diabetes. So the research gap and the exclusion actually harms those of us with SMIs. It actually exacerbates physical health inequality. There is also a sense of inequity. So, you know, perspectives of mental health are changing. So there's much more sort of publicity. Stigma is reducing, but that stigma is still very present when it comes to things like bipolar, psychosis, and schizophrenia. And I feel that the exclusion perpetuates that stigma. There are also obviously issues, so just very briefly, health system implications of persistent exclusion of mental health, those of us with mental health. So reduced effectiveness of intervention, be that physical or psychological, cost resource implications for treating preventable disease, and also public health. There are those in the populations that, for example, may smoke, may use drugs. So that is also something to consider. And also, I think, as has been mentioned previously, so there's equality, diversity, and exclusion. They are sometimes used as buzzwords. From me, a social justice background as regards patients, those with serious mental health disorders, but obviously, as we've heard, equality, diversity, and exclusion in terms of representativeness. And also, with a previous commercial head-on, for pharmacy, if you're not inclusive, you risk barriers to route to market and inhibition of innovation. So why does exclusion of mental health persist? So I think there is still bias, and I think I will perhaps have the opportunity in the round table afterwards. But in my own experience, not so much as a patient, but the other involvement, the other panel work that I do, for me, one of the issues is not just research design and formal inclusion and exclusion criteria, it is also discretionary. And that is because often the person doing the recruiting, a healthcare professional, can have biases, and they can be overt, I've heard very overt bias, but also unconscious bias. And also there is a wider issue of deprioritisation of mental health funding. So I am looking at things obviously from a European perspective, but particularly in the UK, there's loss of funding to mental health, cuts to service, lots of people with serious mental health disorders are being off-rolled from services with no support, no community mental health support whatsoever. So inevitably, if it's being deprioritised in terms of research funding, it's going to be deprioritised as well. And I also think that there are regulatory gaps still. I think that regulators need to be there needs to be far more evaluation of exclusion criteria of mental health. But the big thing, and I've put it in red there, is vulnerability. And I know that Tamas touched on this. I used to be an English linguist and etymologist. Vulnerability we hear so much about. It's one of those words, it's a buzzword. It's one of these words, and it's often used, and I think legitimately, for exclusion criteria. If we look at Belmont, if we look at Nuremberg, the injustices that were done in the past, and we must never go back to those days. But there is also an issue of vulnerability being used as a get-out clause, as an excuse to not include. So I actually give lectures on the term vulnerability. Don't have time for that today, but that is, I would just think about that use of word, and also the research participants, or those of us with a serious mental health disorder. What is our perception of vulnerability? Do we regard ourselves as vulnerable? Are we being dismissed? Obviously, concomitant with vulnerability is consent and capacity. We're hearing a lot about that in the UK at the moment because we've got debates about assisted dying. Capacity is, it's for very few people is it fixed. People's capacity maybe can come and go, it's variable. There are ways of actually mitigating against that, which hopefully we'll discuss afterwards. So, I'm going to talk about reasons to be cheerful very briefly. So there are some forward-thinking initiatives, and it's being proactive, I think. So I am attached to King's College London. For my sins, I'm doing MSc in medical policy. What I would say to anybody is don't return to do a postgrad 30 years after you've done an undergraduate, because writing an essay is absolutely, and I'm telling you that I'm going to finish it as a way of manifesting, so thank you, that's accountability. And a scheme that King's College London has at their Institute of Psychiatry is something called consent for contact. And that is any patient or service user, as they're referred to. I don't like the term service user because it suggests that there's a service that one can use. I think patient, for me, is a more honest term, and there's parallels with, obviously, physical care. So there's a scheme, and I will discuss it more, called consent for contact. And that is where, when somebody comes under services, they will have a researcher, or they might have a peer researcher or a patient research champion that discusses with them potential research and asks if they want to be kept on a register. There are issues with implementation, which I will discuss later. There is increasing patient and public involvement, and I know EUPATI are brilliant at that. I'm leading some strategy work at King's across some of the hospitals in London. However, there are caveats. So I have my privileges in that I'm white. I have a serious mental health disorder and a neurodiversity and a stigmatising women's health issue. And I have also experienced extreme social deprivation. So I've gone from middle class family down to below working class, up to middle at the moment. So we all have most of us have got some issue. And increasing patient and public involvement is great, but I think, as we've heard previously, there is sometimes we're not homogeneous. All of us are different. And that goes the same for patient groups. So there are caveats with that, but it's really good to see now that, more protocols and so on and so forth. That's the practical bits. I still think that there are more ethical and the whole sort of design and actually prioritization setting with research. There's increased researcher awareness. So although there are issues, I think, with some of the senior thought leaders, clinicians who still hold biases, most younger researchers actually are absolutely brilliant. We hold clinics, and I think that, that's hope for the future. And there's also increased inclusion of mental health, those of us in mental health, in AI software and app development. However, there's a caveat there. AI is with us, but it doesn't replace the day-to-day care, the day-to-day relationships. And one of the issues that I'm seeing a lot is that the sort of development that is going on in AI and software, particularly as regards mental health treatment, is not necessarily treatment, it's triaging. And it is also surveillance. There is a case which I can perhaps share with other people where completely immoral. And I would argue that a lot of it is replacing care, which it does with physical health conditions as well. But I see on funding panels that those innovators that are seeking, and companies that are seeking to deploy AI, design and deploy AI and apps in mental health can be very, very, very exclusionary. So it's a reason to be cheerful, but with caveats. And finally, next steps and a call to action. Patient involvement needs to be systematic and inclusive. Inclusive is another word which needs unpacking. And it really needs to reach out to the underserved and stigmatised populations, and maybe those that homeless, maybe those that use drugs, those that have left prison, because there is a tendency to reach out to patients that are known, to patient organisations that are known, and they often have the sharpest elbows. And I've seen issues with that at the UK's MHRA. And that involvement, as well, as I've just alluded to, needs to be at all stages, not just when it comes to protocol design, because you've missed a trick earlier. If you've not set the priorities correctly, if you've not thought about the ethics, then it's doomed to failure. Consider PI and opinion leaders. I've referred to that before. And I think that we need more rigorous auditing. And that applies to regulators, that applies to higher education institutes, that applies to industry, and it applies to funders. So with that in mind, I would ask, do we actually mandate inclusion? So that's just something to think about. Anyway, thank you very much. I don't think we've got time for questions, have we? Because we've cut short a little bit, so... Oh, sorry. Oh.
It's working. Are there questions?
Oh, never mind. Thanks, Tamas.
This is, thank you. It's not really a question, but thank you very much for mentioning epistemic injustice. I think that this is super important. Can you just, in one sentence, summarize to those who maybe are not familiar with the term, what it is? Because I think it's really, really at the bottom of what we're talking about.
Yeah, thank you, Tamas. I think it was on one of the slides, and I come from a social science background. Epistemic injustice, very simply, is not being listened to and being perceived, not being listened to because of a perceived identity. So epistemic injustice is frequently experienced by ethnic minorities, women, mental health. It's a way of actually disregarding what you are saying, your belief systems, and so on and so forth. Would you say, Tamas?
Yes, there's actually, you don't judge a statement on the basis of its truth, but you judge it on the basis of who says it.
Yeah, thank you. Yes.
You don't judge a statement on the basis of its truth, but you judge a statement on the basis of who says it.
Absolutely. And I think, for me, I said that I am a patient, but I'm more besides, and I think that that stems from a previous sense, current sense of epistemic injustice, where what I've said has been framed as a woman with a mental health disorder and nothing more. So thank you very much. Vale, gracias.